Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I am a missionary, the son and grandson of missionaries, and so when it comes to traditional Maori introductions, it gets a bit complicated. What's my river? What's my mountain? My father was born beside the Yangtze River in China. I was born beside the Nile River in Egypt. My children were born beside the Meghna River in Bangladesh. What's our mountain? There's no mountains in Egypt or in Bangladesh. However, if you travel a bit north of Bangladesh to Darjeeling, you can climb up the mountain there, you drive up this road that winds up and up and up, and you reach 2,000 meters, and you think, wow, we're really coming up, we're getting up to a good altitude here. And they say, look out and see the mountain. And you look out, and it's just cloud. They say, look up. And up there is Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world, something over 9,000 meters. We're only at 2,000 metres. So, what's our mountain? When Adrian and I have been learning Maori last year and this year, and when we do our introductions, we tend to say that our mountain is, our monga is Kanchenjunga, and our awa, our river, is the Meghna, because of our links with India and Bangladesh. In the traditional church calendar, today is Ascension Sunday. The days after Easter, we celebrated Easter, and following on from Easter comes the time when we remember that Jesus went up to heaven. Coming up is Pentecost. But we're here today talking particularly about NZBMS and the self-denial appeal. And so the passage that we're going to read this morning as part of the self-denial appeal is from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. I'm reading from the contemporary English version, but whatever versions you have that you look at, the words will be something similar. Jesus was standing on the shores of Lake Gennesaret, teaching the people as they crowded around him to hear God's message. Near the shore, he saw two boats left there by some fishermen who had gone to wash their nets. Jesus got into the boat that belonged to Simon and asked him to row it out a little way from the shore. Then Jesus sat down in the boat to teach the crowd. When Jesus had finished speaking, he told Simon, "Row the boat out into the deep water and let your nets down to catch some fish." "Master," Simon answered, "we have worked hard all night long and have not caught a thing. But if you tell me to, I'll let the nets down." They did it and caught so many fish that their nets began ripping apart. Then they signalled for their partners in the other boat to come and help them. The men came, and together they filled the two boats so full that they both began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this happen, he knelt down in front of Jesus and said, "Lord, don't come near me. I'm a sinner." Peter and everyone with him were completely surprised at all the fish they had caught. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were surprised too. Jesus told Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will bring in people instead of fish." The men pulled their boats up on the shore. Then they left everything and went with Jesus. The self-denial materials, the brochure that you've received today in the newsletter, and the other materials, a call to bring in people instead of fish, about going and pushing out into the deep, being challenged to think of new opportunities, being prepared to move out. We saw the video clip of Nandita, challenged to move out into a new area in terms of how do you reach to the workers in the garments factories in Bangladesh. Self-denial appeal is about how the gospel message needs the messenger who will take the gospel for those who need to hear. It's the call to mission. But I want to veer off a little bit on one side for a while and think about a slightly different perspective on the gospel. When I read the Gospel of Luke, I read a gospel that's written for the poor. A gospel that focuses on the poor and the needs of the poor. Go back to chapter 1 and the song that Mary sings when she meets her mother, her cousin Elizabeth. Mary, the mother of Jesus, Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, both of them unexpectedly pregnant in different ways. They meet and Mary sings this song. God gives the hungry good things to eat and sends the rich away with nothing. When we were living in Bangladesh, we would often get beggars coming to the door, and a lot of them would be women who would come, and Adrian would take time to sit with them and talk to them, not just to give them something, but sit and talk to them. And one Christmas, she read the Song of Mary, the passage of Mary in chapter 1, to some of these poor ladies. Their faces lit up. This is a message for the poor. Several times in the last few years I've spoken at Carey Baptist College in Auckland to the students there when they've been studying the Gospel of Luke, and talked about this perspective of Luke as the Gospel for the poor. And I've challenged them to find references to poverty and the needs of the poor in every chapter of Luke. And there are references there in every chapter. Moving forward to the story of the start of Jesus' ministry in chapter 4, when Jesus comes into the synagogue and he's given the scripture to read, and the passage that he reads is the passage that says, "The Lord's Spirit has come to me because he's chosen me to tell the good news to the poor. The Lord has sent me to announce freedom for prisoners, to give sight to the blind, to free everyone who suffers, and to say, this is the year that the Lord has chosen." And the significance of that phrase, this is the year that the Lord has chosen, was the year of Jubilee. In the Old Testament, the year when the slaves were set free, the year when debts were remitted, the year when there was a levelling out again between the poor and the rich. Now, he's not talking about he sent me to the poor in spirit or the spiritually hungry. Sent me to the poor, freedom to the prisoners, give sight to the blind, to free everyone who suffers. We move forward again to Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. We know the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit is Matthew's version. It's not in Luke. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are you people who are poor. His kingdom belongs to you. We worked in Bangladesh, one of the poorer countries of the world. We came back to New Zealand, to one of the wealthy countries of the world. So I want us to think a bit this morning about poverty, but let's start with a bit more of an introduction. This thing will work. No, there we go. No, jump a whole lot forward. Oh, okay, that's what I've just been talking about. I didn't move it forward earlier. NZBMS. We worked for NZBMS in Bangladesh. When we went out to Bangladesh, it was just NZBMS. Then it became Transcend. Now we're going back in many ways again to the term NZBMS as an umbrella term to talk about what goes on underneath that umbrella. And underneath that umbrella we have 4 departments. We have Transcend, which is the traditional mission sending agency. It's the staff that we have in Bangladesh, the staff that we have in India are employed, taken on, sent out, supported by Transcend. Transcend is the traditional mission department part of the organisation. We also have Banzaid, which is where I'm now working, which is about development as mission. Concern for development issues, and we'll come back to talk about that more. Then we have marketplaces, which is seeing business as mission, and the business companies that have been set up to be part of the mission that NZBMS is doing. And I'm sure you've heard plenty about FreeSet, and there's several other companies that we New Zealand Baptists have set up to be part of the mission work that we're doing. And then Mission World. There's New Zealand Baptists in just about every country of the world, in just about every mission organisation. So let's not see it as some sort of competition that they all have to be part of NZBMS. NZBMS can't support them all, can't have work in every country. But let's help people to find where they're called to, the organisation that they're called to be with, and how they can best be serving God. And so if there's anyone in a New Zealand Baptist church who feels that God is calling them to mission, we will help them to find the right place, the right organisation, the right situation for them to be in. And that's what Mission World is about. So these 4 departments working together there. But I want to talk more about the one that I work with, which is Banzaid, Aid and Development. Missions have always done development. Mission schools, mission hospitals, mission agricultural programs. It's a part of mission teaching, that you can't just preach the gospel without some concern for the people that you're working with as well, and for their needs and their physical needs. So missions have always done that development, but Banzaid is being a bit more specific about it, a bit more focused on it, in a way that enables us, particularly, to be able to get support from the New Zealand government. And the aid program funding, the money that the New Zealand government gives for international aid. And by having a separate department like this, we can access some of that funding. In the last 7 years that I've been working with Banzaid, we've had nearly $2 million in support from New Zealand government aid program money. It's your taxpayer money. It's another way that we can get the funds and use them and support the projects that we're working on. So that's the advantage that we have of having that separate organisation. Now, in development, one of the sort of common phrases that's used is, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach him to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. Now, it's actually quite a bit more complicated than that. So let's have a look at some of the ways in which that can be used and the ways that can be interpreted. In a disaster situation, we can think about the cyclone in Vanuatu recently, the earthquake in Nepal. People need to be fed. In the disaster situation, they need food. And so it is, yes, a matter of giving them the fish, giving them the food for the day, because that's what they need in that disaster situation. And so that's the humanitarian aid, the emergency aid. And it's a necessary part of aid programs. But the next stage, teach a man to fish, and you fish for life. That's saying help people to look around at the resources that are around them and to find and use those resources. Now, actually, Rotorua and driving up from Taupo yesterday, there's lots of fishing going on. It's a different kind of fishing to what we're talking about here. But is there any, do you know of any community where there are fish in the rivers or streams or lakes or sea around them and they're not catching those fish? If there's fish there to be caught in, any community will be catching them. So let's not go and teach grandma to suck eggs. People know how to fish. And if they're not fishing, it's probably because the water's too polluted, or because someone has come along and claimed those fishing rights and blocked them off so that they can't fish anymore. Blocked access to the fish, blocked access to the streams or the rivers or the lake, so that the fish can't be caught. And so there's an issue of human rights, and we talk about rights-based development that says, hey, why are these people poor? Not just that they are poor, but why are they poor? And often there are political, social, economic issues that are issues of human rights that are keeping people poor. There's the famous statement from the South American bishop who said, when I fed the poor, they called me a saint. When I asked why they were poor, they called me a communist. But that's part of the development issues. It's not, you can't help people if there are those economic and social and cultural and political issues that are keeping them poor. However, we can take the whole phrase another stage further and say, okay, we teach them to fish, and they eat. You catch a fish, family eats. Next day you've got to go out and catch another fish. The family eats, next day another fish. And that's a subsistence lifestyle. Yes, you get the food that you need, but you're still at that same level each day, day to day. In today's world, when your children fall sick and you need medicines, you need some cash to buy the medicines with. When you want to send your children to school, you need some cash to pay for the school fees. When you want a house that's not going to be blown down by the next cyclone that comes through, you need some cash to buy the better materials to build your house with. And so you need more than just the subsistence economy. And so you need economic development. And that's where you start to say, well, okay, not just catch a fish, but let's set up a fishing business that will earn you some income and will employ you, and not just employ you, but employ others as well, and let's set up something that's got a bigger scale to it. So, how do we go about that? At the first level, that's what we call microfinance. You give someone $10 capital and they set up a micro business. In Bangladesh, we talk about the Grameen Bank and the microfinance scheme that was started by Professor Muhammad Yunus, who realised that one of the problems that the poor have is they don't have access to capital, they don't have access to funds in order to be able to set up. But actually, the poor are a good loan risk. The poor are more likely to repay their loans often than the rich are. And so it's worthwhile finding ways to give them funds. And that's the microfinance. But microfinance is still living on the margins. You set up your micro business, but then something goes wrong. Someone in the family falls sick. You need to buy medicines for them. And you've got a choice. Do I buy medicines for this person who's sick, or do I keep the capital that I need for my business? If I buy the medicines, my business is going to collapse. Which are you going to do? And of course, you're going to buy the medicines. And so you're back where you started from. It's living on the margins. And the other part of it is not everyone has business skills. There are some people, you give them $50 today, by next week it's going to be $100, by next month it's $500, and they're away. Some people just seem to have that ability, that the money just keeps coming to them. But others are entirely the other end of the spectrum. You give them money today, tomorrow it's gone. And where are they going to do? Where are they going to get money from again? We had a guy come to us in Bangladesh that we tried to help with a microfinance type business. We set him up with capital to buy a basket of lemons every day and take them around the town selling the lemons. And if he did it well and carefully, he could make a living for himself doing that. At the end of the day, he would have money for food, and he would still be able to, tomorrow he would be able to go and buy another basket of lemons, or whatever product it was that was there to sell. But he could never make it work. He would be back in a few weeks' time. It's gone again. It just doesn't work. He just didn't have that business skill to be able to do that. And as I say, it's living on the margin. So the other extreme is globalization and the multinational corporations. We all know in New Zealand how many jobs have been moved offshore because they've been moved to a country where the wages are cheaper. And yes, it helps the people in that country. Yes, they've got jobs now and they've got opportunities. But the danger of it is that too often it is sweatshop labour. And it comes with hassles and with exploitation of the poor. Bangladesh is very much into the garment manufacture. In New Zealand, most of our clothes are made in China now. But Bangladesh is also big in the garments manufacture, and they supply a lot of the European and American market for clothes. But as we saw in the video clip with Richard and Sally and Nondita there working, some of the conditions in those garments factories are appalling. And the bottom picture there is the building that collapsed a couple of years ago. The garments factory building, multi-storey building, just collapsed. And hundreds of people died. Because of the total disregard for any safety requirements. Total disregard for building requirements, whatever. So, yes, the multinationals and the globalization has done a lot for poverty. And Bangladesh has moved off from being right at the bottom. But there's still a lot of issues with it. So is there something in between? We talked about the microfinance on one end and the multinational corporations on the other end. What's something in between? And what we in Banzaid have been working at is something in between in terms of what we call small to medium enterprise. It's the next stage up from the... Have I lost sound here? No? Right? It's the next stage up from the microfinance is the small to medium enterprise, which is, in most countries, the small businesses are the backbone of the economy. They employ more people overall than the big corporations. When you put the small businesses together, they employ more. And so we're looking at a business-based development that has at this level of the small to medium enterprise business. Couple of examples. In Papua New Guinea, in one of the tribal areas in the highlands, 40 years ago, New Zealand Baptists were part of introducing coffee as a cash crop. They were subsistence farmers, and as we said, they need a cash income in today's life. So coffee was introduced as being a cash crop that they could grow. They were set up with a good co-op, and they were able to get their coffee beans to the market and get a good price for them. But then they had a period of tribal fighting. Papua New Guinea is divided up into hundreds of small tribal groups. People in the next valley over are a different tribe, different language, different culture, they're different. And to get people working together is very difficult. And so there was this period of tribal fighting that totally destroyed the coffee co-op that they had. The coffee was still growing. When you needed some cash, well, you took a bit of your coffee and you took it down to the local market, and there would be someone there who would buy it. But not a good price. And they were being ripped off. Now, the Baptist Union of Papua New Guinea, we don't have any more New Zealand Baptist missionaries there, but the Baptist Union of Papua New Guinea is well established, is running itself, and they've negotiated a peace agreement among the tribes in this area of the highlands that we're working with. And having got that peace agreement, they now want to rebuild the economy. And so they were talking at one of the gatherings of Baptist leaders. They talked to some of the New Zealand Baptists that were there and said, well, what can we do to rebuild this coffee business? And so they came and talked to me, and I said, well, yes, we can put something together that will get some funding from the New Zealand government. So what we've done is set up a coffee trading company. We haven't gone back to a co-op model, because the co-op might again get caught up in ongoing tribal fighting. So we've set up a trading company that's owned by the Baptist Union to take it out of the local politics. And the company will buy the coffee direct from the growers and get it to the market. And that cuts out various layers of middlemen who've been ripping people off. We'll also work with the growers to improve the quality of what they're processing and selling. And we'll also work to diversify so they're not just dependent on the coffee. Global coffee prices go up and down and all over the place from year to year. We've seen how dairy prices are dropping this year for New Zealand and the loss that that's causing for New Zealand farmers. Well, global coffee prices are far more volatile even than dairy prices. And so we're saying they need to have other things as well that are part of their cash economy. And so last month they harvested their first rice crop. That we put in a rice crop on some land that was available, and put in a demonstration rice crop and harvested that last month. And Papua New Guinea is eating a lot more rice now than they used to. It's not a traditional food for Papua New Guinea, but they are eating a lot more rice, particularly in the cities. And so rice is a crop that the local farmers can grow and sell in the city and get a good price for. So that's the Papua New Guinea coffee crop. We've had 700,000 New Zealand dollars from the New Zealand government. We're committed to putting in $100,000 over 3 years, and the Papua New Guinea government have said that they're going to give us 500,000. So far we've only seen a quarter of it, and we've finished the second year of the project, but we're hopeful that we will get some more of it. And this year is going to be a fairly crucial year for them. They're aiming this year. Last year they bought 80 tons of coffee from the growers. This year they're aiming for 300 tons, and that's only a small fraction of the market for that area of Papua New Guinea. But the fact that we are coming in and paying the farmers decent prices is forcing all the other buyers to put their prices up as well, which is all good for the farmers. So, the next project is West Bengal Freedom Businesses. You've heard about FreeSet. FreeSet started up in Calcutta, working in the red light area of Calcutta, working to give an alternative income so that some of those women could get out of the sex trade. Women who have been trafficked into that position, and in working with those women, FreeSet discovered that around 30% of the women that they were working with had come from one particular area of West Bengal to the north of Calcutta, about 200 kilometres north of Calcutta, this area of Murshidabad. And so they said, well, can we put a fence at the top of the cliff? Instead of being just the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff working with the women in Calcutta, let's put a fence at the top and do something for those girls in the villages so that they're not sent into the city. The reason the girls are sent into the city is the poverty of the families. And someone comes from the city, a broker comes from the city to the family and says, look, if you pay me some money, I can get your girl, your daughter, a good job in the city. I can get her a job as household help, or I can get her a job in a factory, and she'll get a good income, and that'll be able to help the family. So the family pays over a lot of money to this person who says, I'll get your daughter a job in the city. But the girl gets to the city and discovers that it isn't a job. Well, the job is in the sex trade. The job is in Shomagachi. The job is standing in line waiting for the male customers to come around. That's the job that they get into, and they're forced into it. They don't have any choice. At that stage, if they object, there's, well, your family's gone into debt now to get you into this here, and you've got to earn this money to repay that debt that your family's got into now. And they don't have any options. So, let's provide alternative businesses in Murshidabad that will employ some of these girls. The aim is 4 to 5 new businesses in the district employing 200 to 300 women in the district in Murshidabad. We're still working on it, getting it set up. It's a nearly $2.5 million project. We will get $1.3 million from the New Zealand government if we can finish the negotiations. We're still arguing details. They've approved it in principle, but we're still trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's and get the right shape dot on the I's and whatever. When you're dealing with government funding, everything's got to be just tied off exactly right. But we should, I'm hoping by the end of next month we will be able to sign this off. It's still going to require us putting in money. It's going to need something like $200,000 a year that we put in ourselves. That we will raise not just in New Zealand, in Australia, and UK and other countries where free set goods are produced. It will be setting up businesses that will become self-sustaining. But to set up a business, you've got to have the capital, and you've got to set up training, you've got to set up the equipment, you've got to set up the building, and that's what costs all the money. But once it's going, it should start to feed in, and the aim is we're setting up what we're calling a business incubator that will start these businesses, and as the businesses get going and become profitable, they will start to pay money back into the incubator, which will then help to start more businesses. That's what we're working at. However, this is what we're talking about in terms of business as mission. The business is mission. The business is development. It's not that we're saying, let's do a business so that we can be in this country and get our visa to be in the country and preach the gospel. The business itself is the mission that we're doing. The business itself is showing Christ. Showing Christ's love, Christ's concern. The development is not just saying, let's do a business so that we can use the profits to help poor people. It's saying, let's do this so that we can provide jobs for them, so that they can support themselves. Now that needs your support. That's what part of the prayer and self-denial is about. That's part of what part of the funding from prayer and self-denial goes into that. But we also need more funding beyond that. In the next 12 months, I need $40,000 for the Papua New Guinea project. That's our commitment, our part that we've promised to put into that. When we get the Missionary project started, we're going to need $100,000 a year to keep that going. We need people who will be committed to getting that in and started up. However, I want to come back to one in terms of Luke as the gospel to the poor. We know how the teacher of the law came to Jesus and said, "What must I do to have eternal life?" As Jesus often did when he had people coming to him asking questions like this, he turned the question around and turned it back to him and said, "Okay, what does the law say? What does the law say as to what you need to have eternal life?" And the teacher of the law said, "Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, with all your being. Love God." But he didn't stop there. He went on to say, "And love your neighbour as yourself." So Jesus said, "Yep, that's right. That's what you've got to do." And so the teacher of the law said, "Well, who is my neighbour?" And that led to the parable of the Good Samaritan. With a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, was attacked, robbed, left on the side of the road. The priest and the Levite walked past. The Samaritan came along, someone from a different ethnic group, a different culture, someone that the Jews believe, you don't know God properly, you don't really worship God properly. But he was the one who came along and picked up this man, took care of him, and cared for him. And Jesus said, "Now which one has really loved his neighbour?" Now hang on, what was the starting question? The starting question was not actually, who is my neighbour? The starting question was, what must I do to have eternal life? Now we're not talking here about a gospel of works. It's not that you do these things in order to get salvation. if your salvation has meant anything to you, if receiving Christ, if following Jesus has any meaning, then it has to make a difference to how you live, a difference to how you treat your neighbour, a difference to how you treat the poor. In the context of Luke's Gospel, with this focus on the poor, it is very much how you treat the poor. In New Zealand, we're the rich. Are we the people like the Pharisee, and like the priest and Levite who just walk past, and you see the poor of Bangladesh or other places? What do we do? And not just the poor of Bangladesh, poor in our own country as well. If we don't have any concern for the poor, then the parable of the Good Samaritan says, well, hang on. Are we really on that path to eternal life? I think Luke gets even stronger about it in places. The story of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man who feasted and had all his guests coming to his house. Lazarus, the beggar, who sat at the gate and was happy to have any scraps that fell from the table. They both died. One went to heaven and one went to the other place. Which one went where? The story, the parable, does not say anything about their ethics, anything about their faith, anything about the way they behaved. The difference was just the rich man and the poor man. The rich man who had no heed to the beggar at his gate. He knew the beggar's name. He said, "Send Lazarus down to bring me some water." He knew the beggar's name. He had no heed, paid no care for the poverty of that man was living. It's a strong message. And it's one that too often we miss. Our Christian preaching has focused too much on love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and not enough on the other side, love your neighbour as yourself. I worked in Bangladesh, but in my present role in Band's Aid, I've visited Papua New Guinea a number of times. Papua New Guinea claims to be 95% Christian. But on international global scales of corruption and violence, Papua New Guinea is worse than Bangladesh. Bangladesh claims to have 0.5% Christian. So what has Christianity meant in Papua New Guinea? After the 2009 tsunami, I was part of rebuilding a school in Samoa. In Samoa would claim to be 99% Christian. But when you drive in Samoa on the roads, you're warned, if you're in an accident, you don't stop. Get to the nearest police station. Because if you stop, you're likely to be beaten to death. And even if you're in a vehicle coming along behind and you come across an accident, don't stop. Because local people might come out and take you to have been part of the accident. Where is the Christianity? Let's not just point fingers at Papua New Guinea or Samoa. Let's think about the fingers that are pointing back at ourselves in New Zealand. What is our concern for the poor in our own communities? And what are we doing for them? And that has to be a part of our message. And don't let's just think it's just Luke's gospel either. It is a message that comes through in others as well. Paul talks about people not being just people who hear the message and do it. Or in Matthew, the parable of the sheep and the goats, and where it says, whenever you did it for any of my people, no matter how unimportant they seemed, you did it for me. That's what Band-Aid's about. That's what we're doing. You can have a look at our website, have a look at our Facebook page, find out more about what Band-Aid's about. And I hope that some of you will support what we're doing as well, and support the work that NZBMS is doing. The self-denial appeal, what we say is the target, what we would like to see from the churches is if every family can give the equivalent of one day's pay in the self-denial appeal. That's all it needs in our self-denial appeal, is if every family can give the equivalent of one day's income. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for listening. If you've got any questions afterwards, we'll be around for a little while. You can ask questions. But that's what we're about, what Band-Aid is about.